Hello, my name's Codemaster Jamal. I'm a little under the weather today. Originally, I was going to be doing a different video, but I figured because of how personal that video is, I'm actually going to wait to release that. But instead, I still want to give you guys something as a content creator. So what I'm going to be giving you guys is kind of like an in-depth look at how I created my dialogue manager. And hopefully this video, even if you aren't a Unity developer, hopefully this video will still be useful to you. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Dialogue systems. While you may not notice it, dialogue systems are incredibly important to a game and a game's experience. They add a level of depth and detail to the game that not even the best CGI can offer or deliver. Instead, a lot of world building is surrounded in a game's lore. That is, the written context that brings the setting together, surrounds the characters in the setting, and pushes the reader or audience in a certain direction to give them a better overall perception of the world they are watching, playing, or reading in. In short, it makes the audience feel like they are a part of this world instead of just watching it or reading it from the sidelines. The reason why dialogue systems are important in games is because they give developers a better way to immerse their players in the game's world, and essentially allows the player to feel like they're in this world. Now, let's talk about some objectives that I had when I was building my dialogue manager at first. These were just 3 things that I knew right off the bat that I knew that my class needed before I worked on anything else. The first thing was that I needed it to be a singleton, and the reason for this was because I knew that whatever functions I created for the class that I needed to access outside of that class without instancing that class every time I needed to use it. Which means that I didn't want to create this object over and over again every time I wanted to use something from it. And because I knew that a lot of different objects in my game were going to be using it, it was best to make it a singleton. Even though I was advised on not using too many singletons in my game, I forgot why. I believe Rob Lang mentioned something about it's just a performance issue. I can't remember exactly what it was at this time. So that was the first thing, was that I needed a singleton. I also wanted to make sure that the dialogue manager wouldn't glitch or come across any errors if I created an instance of it in one class and then created an instance of it in another class, and basically you can't have 2 pieces of dialogue running at the same time. So that's why I needed it to be a singleton at first. There were probably some other more practical reasons, but this was my basic idea. The next thing was that I needed the dialogue manager to be able to turn the UI on and off, kind of like a switch. So I needed to be able to load all of the player UI elements into this class and be able to switch it on and off as I please. The final thing, which is the most important thing about dialogue manager, is that I needed to be able to loop through any data that I send to it. Not any data, but more specifically string data that I send to it. I needed to be able to loop through data that I send from the dialogue class into the dialogue manager. So those were the 3 important things I needed to be able to do from this class. Okay, so this is my Unity project. The way how my dialogue system works is that the player, which you see right here, the player has to come in contact with an NPC. This NPC over here, I don't know if you guys can see it too well on screen. I'll try to zoom in. Can't see it too well on screen, but it has this kind of box collider on it. And on the box collider, it's set to is trigger and have this script here called an interaction. So basically when a player interacts or at least comes in contact with this NPC's box collider, the interaction script works, or at least it activates. And what it does is that it basically tells the dialogue manager to basically display an image on the screen, a UI element, and if the player presses the action button, in this case, because we're on PC, would be the spacebar, it basically starts a dialogue, or in some cases you can cause different interactions, and there's a lot of different functionality with it, but for the most part, that's the basic idea. Basically, the player comes in contact with the NPC, and once it's within, it's really hard to tell, but once it's basically within this box here, it causes an interaction. So that's the basic idea behind NPC interaction. I'll go into more depth and detail into it in another video, but for now, that's about it, because there's a lot of different ways you can do NPC interaction within Unity specifically, but this is the basic idea. Now, the way how this interaction actually works here, we're going to go into my dialogue manager because I don't want to spend too much time on NPC interaction. This here is actually just my healer NPC class, which is what you saw before. It's a child of the NPC class, and for the most part, for right now, the only thing that you really need to know is that it inherits this function here called interact. It inherits a lot of different functions, but that's not the point. And within the child of the class, you can basically write your own interaction function, etc., etc. What I really want to show you guys is this here, a script that I wrote called Dialogue, and what it basically is a scriptable object. You can basically go here to Unity. I have a folder here called Dialogues. As you can see, I have Healer NPC, and basically what you can do is you can right click, create, and as you can see, it has a option within the hierarchy called Dialogue, and you can create a new dialogue. It takes about 2 kilobytes, and essentially it's a great way to store information and those type of things within the game that I don't feel like writing or saving to a SQL database or etc, etc, etc. The point being is that within the scriptable object, we have an array of strings, and essentially you can make as many string arrays as you want. With my earlier dialogue system that you guys may have saw, basically with that dialogue system, it was limited to only 3 lines, but you could make more than that. But if you stepped outside of that, it would basically crash the entire system. It's really bonkers. You have 3 string arrays called lines, and then you have a Boolean value called has question, and you have a public question called question, which is another class I created, which basically has a string for the name, and then it has with answers, it's just another 2 string arrays. So it's like a string array within a string array within a string array. It gets kind of confusing, but you'll see it kind of come together later. I also have this enumeration called dialogue type, which I'll work in later in. I still have a lot of work to do with my dialogue manager, but this is the basic gist of it for now. Later on, the dialogue manager will be able to take in these different types of dialogue and kind of sort through different UI options for the player. Let's go on to the main event. This is my dialogue manager. I took a lot of inspiration from a Bracky's video, but for most part, everything else is just me. As I said before earlier, I needed to be able to basically access all of the UI elements within the game. So within the game, we have the player UI, which is here. Turn this UI on. We have the dialogue box here. Also have this button here, which is the action button. So that's the button for the action. This class needs to be able to turn on any of those UI options whenever it's necessary to turn them on. So when you actually interact with an NPC for the first time, this button actually is what pops up, and basically if you press spacebar, you go into a dialogue, and from there on you could start talking, and if there's a question, it'll load the question, etc, etc, etc. So that's why that one aspect, and it's very important to do it from this class versus the way how I had it before, where I was only from the NPC class. And basically the way how I did it before, I didn't actually need a dialogue manager, but now that I do it this way, it makes it a lot simpler and a lot easier. As you can see, it's a singleton, and I did it with a padlock. When you do it this way as a singleton, this makes sure for sure that it's the only instance of this class within the entire project. It doesn't just refer to game development, and then on weak and make sure that, hey, this is the only game object. So basically the way how everything works is that it starts off with this function here called start dialogue, and it takes a dialogue and an NPC. I will be creating another function where it only takes a dialogue, and that one will be used more specifically with cutscenes. And because you're not always, the thing about the dialogue system is that you're not always going to be interacting with an NPC, you know, like imagine what if instead of interacting with this NPC, we're interacting with like a lamppost or like some type of bookcase or something like that, or some type of information that displays some type of lore or some type of context about the game that can't be explained in the form of a living person, like an inanimate object. Even within cutscenes, that's how it will work. In this particular case, I'm using it with the NPC because in this case, we're actually interacting with the NPC. So that's one thing. I did a lot of checks and balances within the entire class itself because I had an error before, which I kind of knew was going to happen anyway. But let's say, hypothetically speaking, for some reason this NPC, let's say all these NPCs were interacting with each other, or let's say they were walking around for some reason and all their box colliders just happen to be running into each other. Then you run into the glitch where basically you're trying to talk to one NPC, but then you end up talking to another NPC and you end up looping. I ended up finding a glitch where basically it kept looping through the data and it never stopped looping. So I had to basically find a way to kind of stop that from happening, and that's why I created this layer status you have here. But basically when the game starts, it's like these true or false values, they activate, and you know, when the player is interacting, it has this state here. Basically what it does is that it sets, when you first start the game, you start off as free, and when you're interacting with the NPC, you go through the NPC interaction, and basically all it does is just change this NPC interaction back to free. That's what causes the loop to stop. What this class does is that it loops through each string within the array of strings, and then it adds it to a queue, and from there we can loop through each character within that string and basically display it one by one on the screen. As you can see here, I'm just simply put accessing tamer dialogue, transformify, and NPC text basically to write, which is why it's important to have the UI elements, because you want to be able to write each line onto the UI. So you want to be able to turn it off and on and then write what you want onto the UI, and that is the complete purpose of this dialogue manager, and that's why it does what it does. See, on the NPC side of things, this is what's actually going on. Have a look at this layer status real quick. It's really not much to it, and the play status is just an enumeration I created, which is why it's important for me to have this instance, because I need to be able to use this outside of just this class. In order to create this dialogue manager, I would have to go public game object dialogue manager. Basically, the tricky part about doing this in Unity is that I've had to do this and then insert it into the actual NPC. Let's say this dialogue manager where I load all the UI elements into. I have to slap this into the NPC itself, and then from there I can access all the functions and stuff like that, which isn't bad, but once again, it's not the most practical thing to do. So that's why I used an instance to take care of that. You know, and it doesn't even have to be like a game object. It can be a dialogue manager like that. It'll work just as fine. The problem is that I'll have to do that for each and every NPC, and I know that I want a lot of NPCs in my game. I want to spend less time doing tedious things and do more programming and, you know, more artwork and things that don't require me to be as on point with things. With systems like that, even the slightest mistake can cause such a huge error. So that's the whole point behind this dialogue manager, is that I basically want to create a system that's easy to use, very manageable. It's less taxing on the brain. Okay, from this here we have key code space if the player is interacting, which is a boolean value, because I'm trying not to do NPC interaction in this video. Within the interaction script that you guys saw on the box collider, within this script here, we basically have, it says on trigger stay, because we only wanted to detect when the player actually is inside of the box and not just when it enters it. And as you can see, which is why I pointed out this interact function. If you remember earlier, showed you guys the interact function with the parent NPC class, so that's why it's important. Every child of that class, like this healer NPC class, has to have that interact function. So basically this interaction class actually sets the NPC to is interacting equals true. This is when the player is interacting with it. If it's interacting and it's not speaking and the player status says that it's interacting and the player is actually free to be able to do this interaction, then basically we're going to set the which is why, once again, the instance is very important, because otherwise I would have to load this UI element where it says here tamer action. I have to load this UI element into the actual NPC class, and it's just a lot of work and hassle that you have to do for each individual NPC in the game, and you could work around a lot of those things just by using a singleton. There's probably a few more things I can go over. Like at this point here, it comes across a question. What happens is that basically this dialogue manager loops through all the lines within dialogue, but if that dialogue has a question at the end of it, then it'll basically display a question, and then from there on, at this point, the player is stuck interacting with the NPC. Then you ask the player, in this case, would you like to heal the party? And then you can click yes or no, which is why you have this key code N and key code Y. I'm gonna have to change a few of these codes if I'm ever going to import my game to like a console or something like that, but that's another discussion. And then if answer is yes, it'll load a different dialogue for yes, and if you choose no, it'll load a different dialogue for no. now. You can see in the dialogue manager here where it says select option 1. All it's doing is turning off some UI elements and then it's starting a new dialogue. So that's how that works. I believe that's all I have to show for now. I could go more in depth with NPC interaction, but for now that's gonna be it. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you, I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to the channel as it helps with the advancement of my game. I will be uploading more tutorial content onto this channel in the near future, but for now, this will be all. Keep making video games. Till next time, this is Codemaster Jamal, and I'm signing out.
Season 2!